today is the feast day of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist. And I don't know if any of you are aware, but St. John was in the news this week. Did anybody see this? I'm not making this up, it's really true. There's a church in Bulgaria that has said for many years that they have some of the bones, the relics of John the Baptist. And they're actually scientifically tested, and they found out that they're not sure it's really John, but they said the bones really are 2,000 years old. And are from a man, and so they're trying to find other relics that are claiming to be part of John and see if they line up together. It's kind of timely that John the Baptist would be in the news. He doesn't get a lot of airtime. But John is a very important character for us, isn't he? In our whole shared story of faith, you know, he comes early on in the gospel narrative. He points the way to Jesus. He prepares the way of the Lord. He speaks kind of with the authority of the Old Testament prophets and sort of scandalizes Israel, certainly scandalizes Herod by calling him out at one point. So we see him as an important part of the gospel story itself. And there's much that we could say about him. It's also significant that John is one of those people talked about in the Bible that we realize God knew very, very deeply. That even before he was born, God had apparently selected his name because he was not to be named after his father. He used to be named John. And we get the sense that even before he came into the light of day, so to speak, that God had a destiny for him. God knew him so deeply, knew where his life would lead. And God's fingerprints, in a sense, were all over John. That's what I want to stop and kind of consider today, is how such a person is known by God. In fact, how any person is really known by God. You know, it's kind of an astonishing thing when you stop and think about it, that any of us can know anybody. You know, we say we know a friend, or we know a neighbor, a loved one, a spouse, a co-worker, whatever it happens to be. But we never fully know that person. We can only know that which that person reveals to us. There's always something of that person that remains within the essence of that person and is not totally accessible to us. My wife, Emily, and I will have been married 40 years this December. And quite an accomplishment for her, actually. And she knows me pretty well, but I have to say she surprises me still. You know, there's still things I'm learning about her. And so we recognize that we don't fully, completely know another human being. We simply cannot do it. But somehow we learn that God does. And it is an astonishing thing. When we hear the voice of Isaiah, the Old Testament prophet, or when we see what's happening with that New Testament prophet, John the Baptist, and we recognize that God knew them so deeply, that he knew the trajectory of their own life, the destiny that they would hold, that God knew their name even before they had a name. And in that knowing, they would live out that destiny right up to the point of the end of their lives. You ever considered that God knows you? I don't mean knows you in a kind of abstract way. Not knowing about you, you know, as if that giant cosmic church directory somehow passed by his desk and he saw your name and goes, yeah, I know about that one all right. Or that he knows you in a way that a scientist might know or have a sense of knowing the composition of the thing that's being observed, its molecular structure, how it's made up of certain chemicals and that sort of thing. But rather, the way that God really knows you as a person, as a human being. How God knows what's moving in and out of your brain, your hopes and your dreams. How God knows what brings you joy. How God knows what it is that breaks your heart. How God knows what brings life to you, what brings pain. How God knows how you sinned, but also how you have been sinned against. Have you ever really considered that God really knows you? Well, let's try a little exercise here today. Now, I know that St. Matthew's is kind of a high participation church because we all do a lot of stuff together, so let's do a little group thing here today. It's very easy. You don't even have to get out of your seat. Just close your eyes, if you would, in kind of a posture of prayer. And just calm your mind a little bit. And I want you to imagine something with me just for a moment. Imagine that you are in God's mind. That is to say, right now, at this point in time, God is thinking about you. What does God think about you? Just let the words of what that description might be just float up into your mind a little bit and rest there. What does God think about you? Now, whatever it is that has come into your mind, just sort of tuck it back there a little bit. We'll come back to it in just a few minutes. You can open your eyes and relax again. You're off the hot seat. I work for Fuller Theological Seminary. I'm the director of their campus in Irvine. And I also get to teach a little bit. And there's a course that I co-teach with a friend of mine called Foundations for Ministry. And it is probably what you suspect. It's a course that kind of teaches people what ministry is all about. And we've taught it for a number of years. But the very first time we taught it, my friend and co-teacher did something that was not in our plan. It sort of made me nervous what he was going to do. And he did exactly what we did, except he handed out little index cards. And he had the people, the students, write down on the cards what they thought that God believed about them. And we gathered the cards up, and during the week he went through them. He called me on the phone and he said, you know, that 3/4 of the people who filled out those cards had a negative view of how God saw them. They said, God is angry with me. God's disappointed in me. I've let God down. I've not measured up to God's expectations. One student wrote, I can't imagine that God would ever think of me in the first place. Now, these are seminary students. They should know better. You know, these are the ones who say, God has called me to this vocation of ministry, and I've come to the seminary to be trained and taught and equipped for this life of ministry that I'm going to take on, and I'm fairly certain God doesn't like me very much. It caused us to reorient the class completely and think differently about how we help people move from a deficit to another place as they move into this vocation of life. So how about you? Have you thought much about what it is that God thinks of you? You know, the psalmist helps us with this. One of the lectionary readings for today was not read aloud, but it is one of the readings for today. It comes from Psalm 139. In fact, it is the entirety of Psalm 139. And it ties so well into the lessons this morning about how God knows someone so deeply and how that is expressed within our own lives. And let me just read this to you with some commentary on it. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. That I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. I tried to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end. I am still with you. Now, this is high praise, isn't it? You know, if I get a mental image of this, I see the psalmist standing on a mountaintop, hands raised, just shouting the glories of God, how amazed the psalmist is at the pervasive presence of God throughout the earth, but God's deep, intimate knowledge of that person. I mean, certainly the psalm speaks for all of humanity, all of Israel, but also speaks to the one crying out to God in praise. It's marvelous, it's beautiful, it's poetry, and then it suddenly takes a real sharp turn. And the whole tone of the psalmist changes from high praise to violence and murder as he shouts out with his weapons in hand, "Oh, that you would kill the wicked, O God, and that the bloodthirsty would depart from thee, those who speak of you maliciously and lift themselves up against you for evil. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you?" Not just hate, but loathe. That's dark language, isn't it? "I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them as my enemies." Now that is a shift in the psalm, isn't it? And the psalmist is screaming out in rage. And the worst part about this part of the psalm is that I can really relate to it. How about you? I mean, let's be honest here. We come together as a worshiping community. We claim to be people loved by God, cared for by God, and we come together in worship and prayer and scripture and song. We pass the peace, we receive bread and wine, body and blood. And when it's over, we get in our cars and we drive down the road and some jerk cuts us off and we yell out, "Oh Lord, that you would slay the wicked." We go to work on Monday and our boss treats us unfairly and we say, "Don't I hate those who hate you, O Lord?" And our neighbor with the yappy dogs and the loud music and we can't sleep at night, "Do I not loathe those who rise up?" I mean, don't we kind of relate to this sort of bipolar life of faith that we have a tendency to lead? That God bless the psalmist for screaming it out, that we can relate to it and we do not feel completely and totally alone. But he doesn't leave us there. The tone changes again. And the psalmist, in my eyes, drops his weapons to the ground and falls to his knees and now continues in prayer and maybe even through tears as he prays, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." You see, the psalmist understood that he was known. He was thoroughly, completely known even before he was born. And the psalmist also knows his own duplicity, his own ability to just run right off of the rails. But he doesn't get left there. The psalmist knows that he can turn once again in prayer to the God who has fully known him, and invite his God to search him, to test him, and to lead him in the way everlasting. This is good news for us, isn't it? We do come together on a regular basis as a worshiping community, don't we? We come together to pray. We come together to worship. We do come to the table of Jesus over and over. And as we do, we learn every single week that Jesus welcomes us as friends. And when we come to that table with all of our faithfulness and our failure all in one person, and we come feeling unworthy, we do come feeling defeated at times, and yet Jesus welcomes us as his friends. And when we see him, we see the very face of God. So how about it? What does God think of you? What has come up in your mind this morning as you have considered what God believes about you and how God knows you? Were some of you perhaps like some of my poor students, where you sort of feel like you're starting out with a deficit today? That maybe you do agree that God is a bit angry with you. Maybe disappointed. Maybe just flat out bored with you. And that boredom just produces his disinterest in you as a person. If that has come up in your life, I have good news for you today. You are fully known by God in all of your faithfulness and all of your failure. And in his knowing, you are also deeply and completely and thoroughly loved. And like the psalmist, God in his love does not leave you in that place, but draws you. And in his love, you are constantly being healed and renewed. Thanks be to God. Amen.